Did you get your Easter baskets? Easter baskets have all sorts of wonderful things in them. I think I was spoiled as a child because I got an Easter basket from my mom up to a couple years ago. She always did a good job with it too. It was kind of exciting. But being from a farm, you kind of expect eggs in there, colored eggs, not plastic ones like this. But from the egg, of course, that hopefully you hard boil them before you eat them, that type of thing. But that from the egg, if you're from a farm and you raise chickens and things like that, from the egg, little chicks hatch. So the egg is a very appropriate symbol for Easter because we celebrate resurrection and new life, and this tomb, which is a place of death, comes forth new life. And the eggs that we see are just many times they're inanimate. You kind of wonder what good is that? It'll provide a hard-boiled egg or something. But if you're from a farm, you recognize little chicks come forth from those. It's new life. And that's exactly what Easter is about. It's not about chocolate and marshmallows and peeps and things like that, but it's about new life, the new life that we've experienced in Jesus Christ. So when we look at the egg, we're supposed to think of not the colors, not the candy, not anything else, but you're supposed to think of the new life of Christ that Christ has shared with us. We celebrate in the last week like 3 liturgical seasons. We celebrate the end of Lent, and of course Lent is 40 days. We celebrate what's called the Triduum. It's Thursday, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday night, and then today begins the Easter season. So we celebrate those 3 great liturgical seasons, and the Easter season is the longest because it's all about joy and celebration and new life. And I think it's done that way for a purpose, because sometimes we get so embedded in all the negativity and all the stuff that we're doing that we forget that Easter is about resurrection and new life. It's shared with us, and that our lives are supposed to be filled with joy and resurrection and new life. That's what it's all about. It's all about Christ rising from the dead. And that's the beauty of what gathers us here together today. John's Gospel. Mary of Magdala goes to the tomb and finds it empty. But she sees there, later she goes and calls the disciples, and so Peter and John go. And so they walk into the tomb and they find the burial cloths there. And they were rolled up. And one of the other translations talks about the burial cloth, the small one being the one that covers the face in terms of a napkin in a separate place. The gospel writer wants us to know that the body was not stolen from the tomb, but that Jesus actually rose from the dead, and he took great care in folding these things up and putting them in their place. A number of years ago actually, I went on retreat and I stayed with a religious order. And the religious order had a common dining room where I ate, and everybody had their own napkin. And if you went to those, fancy places where you have the cloth napkin, you kind of fold it up and you leave it in your place because you're going to be back. Now, one of the internet stories that surfaced a couple years ago was about that napkin. Why did Jesus fold that napkin and put it in a separate place? Because he wanted us to know that he was going to be back. And that we as the Christian community, we as his family today, need to be prepared for his coming. And that's why we celebrate this year after year, because sometimes we forget. Sometimes we go in different directions. Sometimes we're off wandering in doing our own little thing. But we are people who are preparing for Christ to return again. After they experienced the death of Christ, the disciples found themselves locked up. They were afraid of the authorities. They hid themselves away. They locked themselves up. They were afraid of the authorities. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. Look at what happened to Jesus. What's going to happen to us? Mary of Magdala gave the good news, gave the message in today's gospel reading. And they were so enthralled. They experienced the risen Christ. It wasn't just seeing the empty tomb, but it was seeing the presence of Christ. And in the first reading today from Acts of the Apostles, as we're going to be reading for the next number of weeks, we're going to hear about the courage of the disciples. We're going to hear about the good news that sunk into their hearts and the good news that could not be kept because they had to share it. And that's where we come in, because we are also called to be people who share that good news, who witness to Christ And we need to do a good job of that. On Thursday, Father Enrique was the main presider, and he spoke about the Eucharist, the Last Supper. He spoke about the Eucharist, he spoke about priesthood, and he talked about service. We as believers of Jesus Christ, we as believers of the risen Christ, are people of service because we believe in Christ. And as we reach out and help our fellow human beings, we do that. We do that because we want others to know about the message of Jesus. We want others to know about the risen Christ, and so we are of service to others. Last night, Father Nathan spoke at the Easter Vigil, and he gave us the challenge, because many times at Easter Vigils, we have confirmations and baptisms and people received into the church. There were none at St. Francis Cabrini last night. And the challenge that he gave us was a challenge to be like Peter, to witness to the fact that we believe in Jesus, that we have experienced Christ in our life, that risen Christ affects us in our day-to-day activities. The risen Christ affects us as we deal with our families. The risen Christ affects us as we deal with our employers or employees. The risen Christ affects us as we go to meetings, are involved in our churches, involved in our community. Because we need to witness to that. Because the message that we have is a message that just can't stay here. It's a message that goes forth. And we are bearers of that message. The challenge we have is not only of service. The challenge we have is not only of witnessing to the presence of Christ. But the challenge we also have is being people of joy. Sometimes people look at us and we look like we're not happy people. We have sour faces. I mentioned a couple times I did vocation work for a while, and I did a word association process with kids, junior high, high school, and what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word, whatever it is, and they give you the word back. Well, I did the same thing. What's the first thing that comes in your mind when you hear the word priest or sister? And their response was dull, boring, and out of touch. Now, if that's what they're thinking about priests and sisters and religious, they're thinking the same thing about us. Because there is a reason for that. Because sometimes we don't really show the world that we really enjoy believing in Jesus Christ. Where is that sense of joy? Easter is all about joy because Jesus, who suffered and died for us, rose from the dead and sends us forth to tell people the good message, the message of good news. When Archbishop Dolan was Archbishop of Milwaukee, he did a great job, and he taught us how to laugh again. He taught us the power of positive thinking as church people. And now Pope Francis is doing the exact same thing. He's talking about reaching out and helping, and he is a man of joy. And shouldn't that permeate our lives as well? Pope Francis, in his Chrism Mass homily on Thursday, talked about priests and the need to find the exit. Not that they need to get out of church, but they need to find the exit to go forth and reach out to the people of God. And the same thing is true with us. All of us need to find the exit because it's easy being a Christian here, but it's not easy being a Christian out there. It's easy talking about service here, but it's not easy being of service out there. That's where we have to do it. I see a whole renewal in our faith. I see a whole renewal in our church. I see it in the parish. I see it in the archdiocese. I work for the archdiocese. I see it in the church. I see it in the readings that I do, the periodicals and the newspapers. There is a renewed sense of dedication and a renewed sense of commitment to being people who believe in Jesus Christ and follow his footsteps into the world. And that has to be us. So maybe today's the day. I always said Happy Lent. Happy Lent, so hopefully at the end of Lent we become better people. I hope Lent has been a happy Lent, because if it hasn't, we're not going to have the strength to go out and to witness to the rest of the world. We do this together as a community. We do it because we believe not in death, but in new life.